50. Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 406. Before we start, I'm just going to go over a few things. I'm a data coordinator for the Center for Teaching, Research, and Learning. On behalf of CTRL, I want to welcome you to this session. And before we get started, captioning is available for this session. To turn on captions, there should be an option at the bottom of the screen in the Zoom toolbar that says show subtitles. And if you do not see it, you may need to click on more to see that option. And there will also be a brief Q&A portion at the end of the session, during which you could use the raise hand function, or you could just type in your questions in the chat box, and our facilitators are happy to pose the question on your behalf. And finally, there will be an anonymous survey posted at the end of the session. It would be as a QR code that you can scan, or there will also be a link in the chat. And we would really appreciate any feedback because it does help us improve our programming, and it also helps us better support AU faculty. With that being said, I will turn it over to our presenter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. You should be able to see my screen now. To Space versus Cyberspace, contextualizing digital tools in the physical classroom. So I want to welcome you to this space where we can discuss actually a topic that I don't think is discussed nearly enough, certainly from the instructor perspective. This is something that has been brewing in the back of my mind since pretty much the beginning of my academic career. Not only did I go through the what is considered in some ways a standard route of graduate teacher to doing the PhD program to becoming an instructor at a place like American, but I also worked as technical support for the Faculty of Arts in a really big public institution in New Zealand. And so I got to see things from the other side as well, and to be someone who trained faculty and worked with faculty in that capacity. And it's really those two parts of my experience coming together that has informed this topic and this talk. And I hope we will all walk away from this with a sense that there are better ways of integrating digital tools in the physical classroom, and that doing so relies on the knowledge that there is a conflict between what is expected in a physical space and what is expected in cyberspace, so to speak. So the plan today then is I want to introduce some ways to think about using digital tools in the physical classroom in a broadly theoretical sense. I then want to go through some practical examples as well of how using common online teaching tools might work in the physical space. And of course, most importantly, I want to allocate some time for discussion. But to start us off, I believe I have an introductory poll that we might be able to share with people to see how your experience with digital tools in the classroom has been shaped as you return to campus for a physical teaching moment last semester. So I want to know, how did your technology use in the physical classroom change after returning from Zoom instruction last semester? I'll just give people another few seconds to answer the poll, and then I will close it. Right, and so you should be able to see the results that we had come up in front of you here. And so for a bunch of people using digital tools in physical classroom, a lot has changed, right? But your pedagogy hasn't necessarily been completely transformed. A bunch of you have an activity or two that worked well with digital tools, and some of you have gone back to existing strategies that have worked well for you in the classroom as well. So I want to start then actually with almost the final option on the poll, which was going back to existing teaching strategies that worked well. Reintroducing what's already second nature, if you will. And I think the question that is worth asking ourselves to contextualize the conflict between physical and digital spaces in the classroom is how, in fact, do we interact with the classroom space when technology is not involved? You know, consider your use of the whiteboard as an example. When did you learn to use a whiteboard, for instance, the way that you choose to use it at the moment, if you do, right? How do you integrate this physical tool into your teaching? For many of us now, it's almost second nature. Why is that? You know, certainly for me, at my best, the whiteboard is not merely a place where ideas are recorded, but becomes a means of creating discussion or transitioning to another point of activity, right? It ceases to be an end in itself, but actually becomes something that's seamlessly part of the space that I can point to, gesture towards, and use as a springboard for another activity, another point of discussion, etc. Right? And it's this kind of natural flow, if you will, from one activity to another, from one tool to the next, that I want to be able to create using digital platforms within my classroom as well, right? And so how do we successfully create this? The answer actually lies in thinking about the process that led us to being able to interact in the physical classroom as well as we do. So this brings me to the related question. Why are we at ease with resources in the physical space? Let's go with the obvious point. Experience and familiarity, but we shouldn't forget these obvious points. Many of us can still likely remember the first time we had to teach a group of students, right? Walking into that physical space for the first time. Despite the incredibly quirky differences between several campuses and several classrooms, right? The basic configuration of the space is usually largely the same, right? There is a row of desks, a bunch of seats for students to sit in, some kind of stage or area for the instructor to stand in front of a whiteboard, blackboard, or other presentation device, right? It's familiar. Moreover, it's not so different from our experiences as students as well, right? What is one of the major influences on our pedagogy when we go and teach our subjects? It's people who taught us previously as well. All the reading, everything we do, of course that matters, but it's also who taught us and how did they teach us how to teach, right? What did we take away from the way instructors taught us, right? And so that experience and familiarity means we step into the physical space and we begin recreating certain techniques. This doesn't necessarily happen with digital tools because many of the digital tools that we're expected to integrate and use within the classroom were simply not available when we were students, right? And so that creates an additional burden, right? There's a lack of experience, a lack of familiarity, a lack of what does it mean to be the student when interacting with these digital tools, right? And so that's something that's worth thinking about as well. We have almost decades of experience and familiarity with many of the physical tools that are within the classroom, but only a few years of familiarity with many of the digital tools. So physical tools, moreover, are integrated into the space. We are not called upon to hang up new whiteboards, carry in our own lecterns, or bring our own chairs into a physical space, thankfully, right? When we enter into a classroom, it's ready to go for a particular configuration. Now, a number of us do rearrange the space for specific activities, group discussion, things like that. And there is a conscious acknowledgement that the space needs to be reconfigured in order to ensure that an activity is carried out well. The same thing applies every single time you use a digital tool, right? Within the classroom and actually outside of the classroom as well. Digital tools are designed to be set up for a particular task every single time you use it. So in other words, it means setting up an entirely new space, right? And hence, a return to 90s terminology for one slide. No, cyberspace, right? The idea that, in fact, this is a completely different space that we're introducing, and that I'm consciously using this term here because it's the idea that there's another space. Any computing space needs to be set up in order to perform a particular task. Now, I am going to share my whole screen just to change, and hopefully, maybe you'll see this, but if I press and introduce the task switcher in Windows, and I'm not sure if Zoom will show you this, I see every single window available and set up on my desktop at the moment, right? That I need in order to present this particular slideshow. I see the PowerPoint slideshow full screen in a mini window. I see the PowerPoint application open that I was editing these slides on. I see the web browser that has a whole bunch of examples of tools that I'm going to show you later. I see my file system. I see the Zoom main interface as well, right? And I'm merely pointing to this to say that, yeah, there is my desktop, every single time I use it, needs to be set up to accomplish a particular task. All of the applications are deployed, right, in advance. This same principle applies before deploying any technology in the physical classroom. Planning has to be extensive and tasks needs to be tested in order for activities to be successful. And that is because digital tools are not easily set up for integration, are not easily set up for simply walk in and it's going to work, right? Instead, things need to work out in advance. Hence, the advice you've probably all heard before even walking into this particular meeting or conference presentation, ensure that you spend 5-10 minutes before you enter a new classroom or space to ensure the technology works correctly and that your slides are projecting correctly, things like that. This is good practice, but what you're actually doing is you're setting up the space, right? You're introducing a new particular technology, a new particular space into an already physical classroom, and you're testing and figuring out how to ensure that those two things integrate as well as they possibly can. The good news is, despite a conflict between an already set up physical space and you're introducing a new space with your own tools, there is actually really two main ways of setting up any classroom, any digital tool to accomplish a digital task. One is to project your device, right? Something that most of us are absolutely familiar with. And the second is to have students interact with your chosen digital platforms directly on your own devices. So no matter what, no matter how complicated the situation is, no matter how complicated the platform is that you're planning on using, how technical the software, at the end of the day, there are two main ways that digital tools can be integrated within the classroom context: projection and having students interact with their own devices. So let's break these down for a second. So when projecting your own device, as we know, you can use wired or wireless solutions. That's the bit that's easy, usually, right? Computer plugs into an HDMI cable, or you use the room's wireless projection technology to project your screen. There are a couple of advantages to this. Minimizes technical errors. I'm in control over my computing device. I have everything set up in advance. I've tested it before walking into the physical classroom. Therefore, it should work. The other thing is it's familiar, right? This is your computer is something that you interact with on a regular basis. You know its quirks. You know the moment it's going to freeze. You know a whole bunch of things from having interacted with the device on a regular basis, right? So those are some very clear advantages, right? And we want that. You want to minimize the workload on you when integrating technology into the classroom. The disadvantage, though, is that it potentially encourages less interaction, right? Everything has been set up in advance on your device. Think about just a simple PowerPoint presentation like this one, for example. And therefore, there's a potential lack for spontaneity and interactivity. If everything is set up, if everything's working smoothly, you don't have to move. You're in front of your computer, right? Moreover, you're now having to interact with two spaces. You're trying to move the PowerPoint forward, right? In other words, interacting with that digital space. And at the same time, you have the physical space with your students in there as well, that you have to take care of as well. And so your attention, whether you like it or not, is divided, right? Even if it's a slight division between your computer screen and your students, right? There is a division of attention, right? And there are obviously several tools that are familiar to us now that can help with that, right? Wireless clickers, things like that, to help us step away from that computer when projecting a screen. But there are other solutions that I will discuss in a moment. But the other thing is you can have students use their devices, right? And so that increases interactivity, right? It adds variety to the teaching space as well. And we want that, right? You want to break up the activities we do within the physical classroom on a regular basis. But there are several potential disadvantages to this as well. One of them is that it introduces several different digital spaces. Now, you are not in control over what all of your students are doing on their computing devices at once, right? That means their attentions are divided. It means they are very anxious and concerned about ensuring that they are using the tool correctly that you're asking them to use, whether it's something simple, like asking them to take notes in a particular way on their device, or something more complex, like collaborative document sharing, right? Or interacting with a shared PowerPoint, things like that. A whole number of things could go wrong. Their Wi-Fi connection could be poor within the room, right? Their computer could be old and its performance could be improved, right? In other words, you have a whole bunch of spaces that need to be configured at once for an activity, and that is a disadvantage, right? And it's just something that you need to be aware of as you move forward. All of this connects to the idea of, are students digital natives? The answer to that is no, right? There's no such thing as a digital native. Students have as wide a range of comfort with technology as we do. Some of them are incredibly connected to their device. They know all of its ins and outs. Others need to be guided through that process. So what are some solutions? Some really basic solutions that we can look at here. Well, if you're projecting your screen and you're focusing on your device, the first one is a simple one we probably use on a regular basis. Don't keep that screen down. It is incredibly tempting once the computer is working correctly, once the projector is actually projecting the chosen image, to keep it down because it's working, because the input doesn't have to be resynced. The problem with that is that encourages the static issue, right? The idea that you have a static image on the screen, that is what you need to be looking at. It's this PowerPoint, I'm going to talk through it. It creates a space where students feel like, yeah, I can turn off. I can simply look at the PowerPoint now. The instructor will likely post the PowerPoint later on my on Canvas or Blackboard or whatever instruction learning management system you use at your institution. There are clearly limitations to this, right? I find myself putting the screen up and down on a regular basis. And look, sometimes that input doesn't go through and I have to reconnect it. For me, it's worth it. In an ideal scenario, sometimes you can move to the whiteboard and annotate things that are going on within the particular PowerPoint slideshow. But all of you probably know the spaces vary hugely, right? That physical space sometimes involves the projector screen coming down over the whiteboard, at which point you've lost the ability to write notes, right? And to interact with students with that physical tool. Why? Because that digital space has literally come down in front of that whiteboard, and you don't have the ability to interact with that. And so that's a wonderful example of there being a conflict there, right? Do I keep the PowerPoint up in order to ensure that these points I'm talking about are there for students, this thing I've prepared in advance, or do I encourage interaction by putting the screen up? These are decisions that we have to make depending on the nature of the class. These are things that we plan in advance. Another alternative is using your mouse point or highlight tool, to emphasize points, right? Seeing an arrow moving across the screen, putting your presentation in a mode where you can highlight text, right? That can be huge if you're having to work for an extended period within a PowerPoint, right? Or on a more basic level, walking up to that screen if it's something that you can easily reach, right? And reaching out with your hand and pointing to individual points. Again, something that can create that sense of interaction for students. Another really good solution is use student points to add to the slides while presenting, right? This doesn't mean every slide. This means you can have one slide with a question or a set of questions on it, and you're interested in student answers, and then you write very briefly some of those answers on the PowerPoint. That can feel incredibly interactive for students. It encourages discussion and engagement with that PowerPoint file in a way that you necessarily didn't have previously. And on top of that, it becomes a record that students can then access once you upload that PowerPoint after you've saved it to Canvas. And so it becomes something that you and the class created together, right? It becomes a shared moment. And that can be incredibly useful as well. So think about ways of creating that kind of interactivity, even when you are using just your device to project your chosen technology. When having students use their devices, the biggest point I can give you here is devote one part of a class to set up a particular technology or activity, right? So whether you're using shared documents or EdSpace, which is American University's WordPress system, or whether you're using more advanced technical tools, having a little bit of time the first time you use a particular technology for students to familiarize themselves with that, even if it's 10, 15 minutes, incredibly useful, especially if you're going to redeploy that technology with students for the rest of the semester. So for example, I teach 2 courses that use digital tools heavily, right? One of them is a writing class, Writing 101, and that course has them use EdSpace on a regular basis. And so next week, they've already received a bunch of emails from IT saying, hey, your WordPress site is set up and ready to use. Please click this link, log in, and you can edit your site. And so the default assumption from an instructor's perspective is this should just work. They've been given the email. I just have to refer them to it, and things will be fine. And that's what I did in my first semester that I taught this course. And it turned out I ended up leaving a bunch of students behind, right? Who were too afraid to tell me, I don't know, I haven't received this email, right? And after talking with these students in office hours, we realized it was in their spam box, right? Now, I spend 10, 15 minutes, end of the first week. You should have received an email. Open your laptops now, click the email. You should all be logged into the system. Try and create a post, right? Write your text in this post, submit it, see what it looks like, right? This is what it's like to create the system. That very small activity has resulted in far more creativity way down the line in terms of the semester, in students customizing their final writing portfolio websites for me in ways that are incredibly interesting. And that is because that initial comfort that they have gained from using the tech for 5-10 minutes has translated into their willingness to experiment with the platform in their own time outside of the class. Another example, completely different for those of you who are more technically minded. Another course I teach, which uses technology extensively, is a Q2 course, part of AU's quantitative literacy core requirement. I teach quantitative methods in literary analysis, right? Which means stats as applied to analyzing literary works. And the thing is, with that particular course, right, I have a bunch of students who are incredibly scared of anything to do with their computers being asked to do some basic Python programming in order to be able to perform the required analysis, right? The required quantitative methods in that class. Again, though, despite the additional complexity here, the advice is the same. Devote one part of the class to set up that particular technology or activity. That first week, I spend an extensive amount of time saying, this is the software that you have to set up. Here's an example on my computer, so you can see the exact steps you want to follow. I want you to follow these steps right now. We will be returning to this software on a regular basis throughout the course. And I set up every tool that we're going to use in the semester in advance. I make sure that everything is working on their devices without issues, right? And as a result, they're much more comfortable then doing the work of the class, which isn't, can I use this technology successfully? It's, can I deploy quantitative methods successfully, right? And so that's an example of creating comfort with the digital space, right? And then integrating it into the physical classroom by saying, look, this is something we're going to be using on a regular basis. Let's take some time to be comfortable with it, try this, and then we're going to come back and do it again. And so then it becomes part of your classroom community and your classroom space. You can encourage students to lower their screens during discussions. And I put this in front of you so as to say, we know there's a divided attention between using digital tools and bringing in that digital space into the class and discussion. Even with courses that I teach that need to regularly work with computers, I regularly ask people to lower their computer screens when we're engaging with discussion. Because that way, I'm signaling right now the work that we're doing is happening here in this physical space, right? And then when we need to be doing stuff with computers, right, you can then open up your lids and work with the tools there, right? And again, it's all about controlling the way attention operates within that space as well. And once again, just to emphasize that there's no such thing as digital natives. The reason why we exercise this kind of control within the classroom space is because students, just like us, have prearranged ways that they interact with that space using their devices. Most of them use their computers and laptops to perform notes, to write down notes. Some of them have their attention distracted by their emails, by notifications that come in, by chat programs, all sorts of things that go on at once. They need to be helped in terms of how they're going to be using a digital their devices within your particular classroom space. It's your space. It's your particular lesson goals that you want to achieve. So encourage them to do so, right? All of this is to say then that we can now move to sort of practical examples that can help sort of cement these sorts of ideas for us. So the first one I have for you is Canvas. Which is an interesting one, because we're used to thinking of Canvas as well as existing outside of the classroom. However, it can enrich in-class experiences as well. So if you're tired of taking in pieces of paper from short assignments, you can create a Canvas assignment with a text box and upload submission option. So that way, rather than taking a piece of paper, you can have a student write down their responses to a particular activity, things like that, just submit it, boom, you're going to mark it for completion or with a rubric that's incredibly simple. It reduces your time. It can actually be something that is incredibly beneficial for students as well. It gives students a record of some of the stuff they've completed. It gives you a record of how they've participated in the class in a way that doesn't require you to go back through loads of pieces of paper, right? So this becomes easily integrated into the classroom space. Canvas's pages function, one of the things I love about Canvas is that it has these pages functions that can be used to create and deliver multimodal assignment prompts to students. So at American, we have Kaltura integration that allows us to upload video and audio. These seamlessly integrate into any Canvas page that you might want. These pages can also be part of in-class activities. They just need to be set up in advance based on the number of groups involved. So just to give you that example, I am going to move, hopefully you will be able to see my web browser here, to my Canvas page for a course. And so this is an example. I've customized a Canvas homepage here with a table. Incredibly simple sorts of things, and an image function that is used using the built-in Canvas tools. So you can see the table function here. Images, you can go to Unsplash when you click the upload image button. You can search for terms, and you've got a whole bunch of royalty-free images you can use to deploy within your courses to create some pretty cool pages. Now, it's the options here that is the most powerful tool. Whenever you create a new page in Canvas, you can have teachers and students edit the page, for instance. You can have anyone edit the page, right? The default is only teachers, because obviously this has become my homepage for my course. But you can set up as many pages as you want to distribute interactive content to students, and then link to those pages and modules, and then students within the classroom can go in and edit those pages together, right? It's something that's much easier to set up than EdSpace for more simple web-based activities, for instance. And again, students have access to these same sort of images and same kinds of very basic design tools, and these can be fun and useful collaborative spaces within the classroom. My next example is one that a bunch of us have used in online teaching that is incredibly useful here, and that is using shared documents. So you can create shared documents for in-class group discussions, and the main thing I will say about that is that both you and students can refer to previous points made by groups throughout the semester. So now, again, it's this idea of having that record. As long as you make that link easy to access, pasting it into a Canvas module, for instance, can be a great way of making this content accessible. As long as you have that, it becomes something that's very easy to integrate. And remember, it's not just about text documents. You can use shared documents with spreadsheets, presentations, polls, etc., to create that collaborative environment within the classroom. It's also pretty cool to start sharing a PowerPoint that you want students to also interact with, and have it as a shared document while you're presenting. You begin to see, if you create sort of controlled interactions within that space, again, you can create that sort of sense of interactivity within the classroom as well. And then for EdSpace/WordPress, again, this is more about me talking about creating collaborative spaces and creating familiarity with WordPress, right? Give people time to do a reflective post within class discussion. Again, giving them a sense that they understand the system that they're going to be using for assignments later on. The key point here is that expertise is developed, right? Using and increasing our competence in the physical classroom space took years of practice and development. Moreover, we participated in that very same environment as students. Our initial use of new technology in the classroom needs the same care and preparation that we adopted when we walked in as an educator for the first time. We also didn't have access to many of the technologies that we use to teach at the moment. So in short, be careful and patient as you gradually develop expertise, pick one or two vital tools, and integrate those into your classes. In other words, those of you who in the initial poll said, yes, I am using digital tools much more, or I am integrating one or two activities that I think work well, you're on the right track, right? It's gradual development that allows us to use tools successfully in our pedagogy. And so with that, I want to create some time for discussion. And so I have these on a shared document that I'm going to put in the chat right now. So let me get that ready. Right there for you. And the questions I have, what are some of the major challenges that you face when integrating digital tools/platforms in your in-person teaching? Are there solutions to creating a close integration between the digital and physical spaces within a course context? How can we achieve these solutions while respecting an instructor's time? And what do you wish you knew more about when using digital tools in the physical classroom? And so I am going to create breakout rooms. And I will bring you back here within 10 minutes or so. See you soon.
Benjamin, I didn't know if you wanted to just put the other people in the breakout rooms.
I've put them in.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think I've got everyone in a breakout room assigned.
Okay.
But what I did is sorry, we've got room 1 and 2 have active. Okay, we've got someone who's moved to room 3 just now. I'm going to move them to room 2 so they've got people to talk to, or room 1. There we go.
Christine, Lori. Okay, there. And Christine and Lori. Sorry, I was trying to send that message to Shane. We've been together all day.
You did send it to me.
I did?
Yeah.
I sent that. I sent it to both of you then.
Oh.
Oh my gosh. I kind of feel like I'm back in the first day of Zoom. I don't know why. I just feel like I don't know. I that's just kind of how I feel in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long day.
It has.
Understandable.
All right, let's bring them back.
Just a quick reminder that we do have about like 5 to 7 minutes left.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Just waiting for the breakout rooms to fully close and just hear some sort of final comments or points that can help us with this idea of integrating digital tools into the physical classroom. Hey, welcome back. What were some sort of what were some sort of main points that sort of came up in discussion that might be worth talking about here in the last few minutes that people want sort of more thoughts on?
That was a good discussion. Oh, by the way, hi, Benjamin.
Hello.
We were in a breakout room earlier. Yeah, one interesting thing for me, at least from my experience in teaching, particularly with adults, is and I call this like a Disney effect that we need to think. It's a stage management, right? So it is thinking about the steps, making it smooth, playing in advance, planning for some drama and twists. Students and anybody who's in the room don't like predictable. Oh, you're going to teach me about the American Revolution. I'm going to teach about this. I'm going to die. Even if you show me slides, but some twists and turns and digital can be good for that, with including sounds, voices, including like, oh, what if George Washington did this? Like what will happen? Oh, where's this coming from? All of a sudden I'm paying attention, or something along those lines. It's just a using stage management, because I think digital is just a great tool to attract. Another thing I use, I said to the folks in the room, is I have a whisperer in the room, could be the student or somebody else, who is editing the slides as I'm presenting. So I said to the person, as we are finding better points than I have, you go ahead and capture it and change it. So it looks like a magically changing, and people in the room are like, so do you see this change? What is going on there? And so it's exciting for a person to do it sort of secretly, gives them power, but also it's good for you to see that. So it's interesting, these techniques. But and I started mainly in hybrid. I was always teaching in hybrid, so I had to go from hybrid to 100% digital. That was a little hard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And those are some good points. And yeah, that idea of sort of planning and setting the stage in advance is incredibly important to successfully deploying any tool in the classroom. And that idea of stage management that you brought up is a really good one, right? It's quite interesting, because you think about it, the classroom space, when we think about it in a physical sense, always has this level of unpredictability, right, that we expect. We don't know how students are going to react to things. We don't know where the discussion is going to take us necessarily. The digital space isn't made for that kind of unpredictability in that way, right? Things need to be set up so that they work perfectly in advance, things like that. So then how do you create that same level of interactivity and interaction? It's about giving students the opportunity to participate within those spaces as well. Absolutely. Angela.
I think you're beginning to touch on something that I would like to hear some more on, perhaps from some of our colleagues, is that idea of, there is that careful preparation and planning. And I find when I do that, then I kind of have that tension between that and going with the flow, and something's going to change, and where's the input, and how do I design for that, but if it isn't coming. So I guess in the one hand is sort of that acceptance of, okay, it's always going to be uncertain. And on the other hand, oh my gosh, I'm going to put all this time, or should I not put all this time into it? Because I'm going to put some time, I'm going to put all this time into it, but then it wasn't useful because I didn't give students enough space. And so how do you prepare that spaces such that it can move with the students? I think I'd like to hear some more ideas about that, because I'd like to do that more and better.
Absolutely. Do others have comments before I put in my 2 cents?
I definitely had that problem when I was teaching online, like making that space. I could be prepared and everything. And it's like, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. But then it's like, I get to my class and it's radio silence, and or something. And yeah, I'm definitely interested in hearing some feedback on what I could do, what I could have done to change that.
From sort of my experience, less is more, which is a weird thing to say after I've gone through and talked about all of this planning and digital tools and all these things. But that's actually something I wanted to emphasize, is the gradual integration, right? And it's why I brought up that example of what was it like to use the whiteboard for the first time when you walked into the classroom and writing on it. My handwriting didn't work on it at all. Like there's all of these things that we've solved gradually through experience. And the same thing applies to these digital tools here. So what I would say is, I would plan 1 or 2 activities within the space, right? And I would then ensure that, and be realistic about it and say this might fail, right? And in doing so, remember that this isn't about you, in the same way that we plan a whole host of activities without digital tools and they fail sometimes to generate discussion. And in doing so, some of us with our lesson planning, we have backups, we have places we're going to go, things like that. All of those features of pedagogy don't change just because we have a bunch of really cool digital tools that has been added to sort of the classroom context. So what I would say is, reduce the amount of pressure that you're putting on yourself in the planning stages of digital tools and give yourself permission to fail, because I failed so many times, and I love this stuff. I really do, right? But again, this is something that's important, because at the end of the day, you can train someone as much as you want in Microsoft Office, in Zoom, in any technology that you want. But until they integrate it within their own practice and understand what works and what doesn't, and what works with their own particular pedagogy, it's not going to mean anything, right? It's just going to be potential, right? And at that point, I would much rather an instructor spends less time on preparing themselves digitally and more time on working with their own sort of pedagogy. And so to wrap up, then I have sort of 3 points to sort of summarize where we're at. The physical classrooms, remember, it's just much better integrated as a cohesive space than any computer. A computer, on the other hand, needs to be set up to accomplish any particular task. It's a flexible device, but that flexibility means that any digital platform needs to be carefully planned and set up. And ultimately, careful planning will mean less problems for you when thinking about integrating digital tools into the physical classroom. But that careful planning doesn't mean I need to spend more time with digital tools. It means I need to think more just like with the rest of my pedagogy, about how this might go down with students and adjust accordingly. In other words, giving ourselves permissions to fail in this space, just as we do in many other situations, and we get on absolutely fine. So remember to use the words of the first person who shoved me into the classroom with very little training. You know more than they do at the end of the day. So the same thing, I think, applies with digital tools as well. So thank you all for spending this time with me. I wish you the very best as we transition to a digital semester, and hopefully see you around in the physical space soon. Until then.
Thank you, everyone. Just before you leave this session, I'm going to share my screen one last time. Give me one moment. We do have a very short survey. It is an evaluation survey for this session, and we would really appreciate it if you would take the time to fill it out for us. It should only take about 1 to 2 minutes, and it is completely anonymous. You can go ahead and scan the QR code on the screen with your phone, or the link is also in the chat if you would like. You can just click on that as well. Thanks again.
And those were also the words my dissertation, my committee said to me.
It's amazing. It's amazing how universal those words are as our sort of go into the classroom and get it done.
I haven't heard them ever, and I think I needed them right now. Thank you. I'm going to take that and go. Thank you both.
My favorite.
Oh, Laura has her hand up.
Yeah, Laura has her hand up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. I noticed you had put some in the chat, Sophie. I have some time.
Yeah, it was good. It's good fun time. No, Tiffany is good. My dad in that academic world is let's not make what I call perfection a way of progress. That's what we say.
So yeah, the questions that I had were the questions. Actually, I raised my hand for were the questions that I asked in chat.
Brilliant. So I was sort of looking at them and ruminating on them while people were in breakout rooms. So yes. So I think the first one there, how do you handle students who do not have their own laptop?
Before the two of you get in to this, do you still have host?
I do still have host, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording.
Yes.
And